Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine war news update, first part thereof, for the 12th of November 2025, although I did do a short video on the use of several guided glide bombs in Myrnohrad. Today we're going to be going through the usual hits and losses, bit of a conversation at the beginning about Pokrovsk, Myrnohrad, Kupyansk, Zaporizhzhia, because I think things are pretty critical in a number of these areas. But before we get to that, please remember to like, subscribe and share. That would be fantastic. Really appreciated. Right, let's get on with the Ukrainian General Staff hits and losses for the day before. So all the usual caveats apply, of course, to these numbers. You can find them linked in the description below. We have 1,000 personnel lost, though that is at the 1,000 threshold that we often talk about. 3 armored combat vehicles, no tanks, so obviously very low in those categories, and 13 artillery systems, likewise under the daily average. I think this is probably as a result of quite a lot of fog in some of these critical areas. 1 multiple launch rocket system, 1 air defense system. So there we have a useful air defense system taken out, although I don't know what that might be. Sometimes they are things like the ZSU kind of auto cannons, pretty old bits of kit, not too much of a loss for the Russians. And then sometimes they're S-400 launchers, and that is a lot tastier. 87 vehicles and fuel tanks lost, so that's under 100, and we have 1 piece of special equipment. Okay, so those are the numbers. We're going to move on to talk a little bit about the front lines, because I think it is pretty hairy in a number of places. The Russians are, calling some successes out in Pokrovsk, saying, hey, Pokrovsk is surrounded, Myrnohrad. There are claims that lots of Ukrainian soldiers are surrendering, that it's been a bit of a disaster in terms of not getting the Ukrainians out of Myrnohrad. Others claiming, so pro-Ukrainian sources claiming it's not what the Russians are themselves claiming to be true. And we have Zaporizhzhia, or the southern Donetsk front, really, going towards Zaporizhzhia, and the advances to the northeast of Huliaipole, which is down on the southern front. That is an area where the Ukrainians are under huge amounts of pressure. So Ukrainian forces have withdrawn from 5 towns in Zaporizhzhia as Russian artillery carries out over 400 strikes daily, destroying fortifications. And some of these strikes with artillery, obviously, are well, many of the strikes are doing huge amounts of damage. But then add to that the guided glide bombs that the Russians are using from aviation, from their jets, and it's a really destructive combination there. We're going to look at some video footage, as I did earlier on this morning, of these guided glide bombs hitting Myrnohrad, but extrapolate that across the front line. It's not just Myrnohrad that they are hitting. Anyway, Russian units are now pressing to encircle Huliaipole and cut supply routes from Pokrovsk in the north. So there are a number of places that are really concerning for the Ukrainians. Jimmy Russian says the pocket in Myrnohrad has been developing for months, literally, that Ukrainian troops were left to be encircled by advancing Russian forces defies all military sense, an utterly unacceptable level of incompetence. So Jimmy Russian, a security analyst in Kiev, is really not happy with this pocket in Myrnohrad that he thinks has been lost, that the Ukrainians are being surrounded there, and they should have been exfiltrated a long time ago. For those denying reality, the current situation for Pokrovsk, Myrnohrad, per Deep State, Ukrainian troops in Myrnohrad and in the south of Myrnohrad are operationally encircled. A full encirclement is eminently possible. This should not have been allowed to happen. Now, Ukrainian Armed Forces Command is saying, look, it is difficult there, but things are not as desperate as some of the Russians are claiming. I don't know. It is quite controversial, should we say, that the Ukrainians have remained in control of this area here and not brought themselves back to kind of equalize this front line. This is an incredibly dangerous area to exist in. and you would only want to keep fighting there if you were thinking about clearing out the larger area as a whole. Otherwise, there seems to be no rationale for staying in position in this pocket to the south of Myrnohrad. Anyway, what do I know? Uh, Savchenko Volodymyr here says the forces, according to the Financial Times, quoting the Financial Times, the forces are exhausted. Pokrovsk is on the verge of a critical shortage of Ukrainian soldiers. We're going to join some of these dots up in a minute. So Ukrainian military and analysts are sounding the alarm due to the intensification of fighting in Pokrovsk and neighboring Myrnohrad. The advance of Russian units into these cities threatens to turn them into a springboard for a new offensive. Experts note the critically low density of Ukrainian forces. The average calculation is only 4 to 7 infantrymen per kilometer of the front. At the same time, the problem of desertion has also worsened. In October, the prosecutor's office recorded about 20,000 such cases. Former Deputy Defense Minister Vitaly Denega called for leaving these cities while it is possible. In his opinion, and that of other military personnel, an attempt to hold Pokrovsk at all costs risks a repeat of the Bakhmut and Avdiivka scenarios, which could lead to a chaotic and bloody retreat. It is noted that the elite special forces of the GUI and SBU were deployed probably too late to significantly change the situation. So that's one interpretation of what is going on there. Then to go back to, oh no, we've talked about Zaporizhzhia briefly. So Myrnohrad, then, what else is happening there are these guided glide bombs are absolutely hammering the buildings, the high-rise buildings particularly. Now, if you are fighting in these sorts of urban environments, you would want to take control of the upper floors of the high-rise to give you line of sight. Snipers, also drone operators, they don't get as much interference by flying from high up, and spotters and so on and so forth. However, who would want to be at the top of a high-rise building when you have this kind of ordnance raining down on you? It's absolutely horrendous. And you'll see coming in from the top left, the guided glide bombs bomb with its wings out. And you can see the shock waves as it hits this building. Just incredible destructive force there of that munition. And then here we have another one. I mean, goodness me, there is barely anything left of that building. Just insane destructive capabilities. And another one hits here. And that building is absolutely shellacked. So these are providing a real challenge for the Ukrainians to defend Myrnohrad. Now, remember, guided glide bombs were I think, the reason, the catalyst to Ukraine losing in Avdiivka. And Russia hasn't really had to adapt its tactics at all. Occasionally, their planes take themselves back from the front line and act far more cautiously when a plane or two are shot down by the Ukrainians. But that's really a rare occurrence. And it requires that Ukrainians probably have to riskily bring a decent piece of air defense equipment near to the front lines. So if that's not going to consistently deter the Russians, they are just going to continue doing this. And there is not a lot that the Ukrainians can do. These Russian air bases and the manufacturing facilities for these bombs need to be completely taken out. But obviously the Ukrainians, are struggling to do that. And that means they are going to struggle to hold on to frontline places because the Russians have the advantage with the sheer volume of guided glide bombs that they can drop. Then, going back to Zaporizhzhia, and as well in Myrnohrad and Pokrovsk, you've got regular artillery being thrown into the mix. About 70% of ammunition currently used by Russia in its war against Ukraine has been made in North Korea, according to an analysis by Ukrainian authorities, which have created classified documents on Moscow's military supplies. Pyongyang has provided some 6.5 million shells to Russia since the start of the war. told you many times before that I think North Korea being involved in the war, it has been something of a game changer. Those troops up in Kursk, the self-propelled guns, the artillery, the vehicles, but particularly the artillery shells. The volume of equipment they've been providing for Russia has meant that Russia's been able to keep up the pressure in a way that they would not have been able to had the North Koreans not become involved. Honestly, hugely important. The North Koreans were dismissed at the time. I was not one to dismiss the North Koreans. Every body that they provide is a body that the Ukrainians has to eliminate. You can't just dismiss them as being, oh, they're bad soldiers, or yeah, the shells they're not the best, or what. Yeah, they're still raining down, and they might not be the best shells, but they overcome that by firing a whole load more of them. Huge challenge. Now, going up to Kupyansk, although the Russians are making some big claims about Kupyansk, my feeling is it's slightly better for the Ukrainians up there. Russia's goal is to capture Pokrovsk by December the 15th. So they've got a month to fully capture Pokrovsk and Kupyansk by the end of the year. So these dates have been pushed back and pushed back as we hear various dates throughout time. And then, of course, those dates are reached and the Russians haven't quite managed to capture any of these places. Various Ukrainian media reports on this, citing sources in the defense forces. In Kupyansk, the Russians are pressing from the north and the west, trying to reach the R07 road, the Kupyansk to Kupyansk to Chugyev road. So I presume that's this road here. But yeah, there are special forces, I think, fighting in Kupyansk. The problem is, as soon as you talk about special forces being involved, you automatically think, wow, that's kind of a last ditch effort. But they're all thought, the claims from the Ukrainians, at least, are not as bad in Kupyansk as they are in Pokrovsk. There are about 70 Russian soldiers in Kupyansk, is a claim from RBC Ukraine. In addition, although Russian invaders were recorded in the northern, central, and southern regions, it can be concluded that the defense forces control at least half of Kupyansk. So that is coming from RBC Ukraine. There are various videos that you can go and watch, of course, many of those getting released on a daily basis. This one is from the 28th Assault Brigade, detecting movement of enemy groups. That's a North Korean multiple launch rocket system there, a little trailer version. So that's come from North Korea, I would have thought. So the 28th here, detecting the movement of enemy groups in time, and the brigade's fighters met them warmly. So during the fog, the occupiers tried to sneak into Konstantinivka, this is north of Pokrovsk, in the Donetsk region. But here we have evidence that at least some of them didn't quite make it. So there is still a lot of destruction of Russian forces, but they just have the advantage of personnel. And that is really biting at the moment. Because, and this is where we kind of have our final dots here in this segment, Ukraine is facing huge problems, quotes, huge problems, finding soldiers as men flee abroad, according to Kyiv Mayor. Now, in his interview, Vitaly Klitschko describes Russian troops attacking in relentless waves like a video game, as he calls for the draft age to be lowered. And you've had a bit of a whammy, double whammy of troops being lost on the front lines, of course, and having to replace fallen comrades with new recruits. As time goes on, there are fewer and fewer recruits or fewer and fewer people to draw from, because those who really wanted to join up willingly have done so already, and you're left with people who don't want to, so they're more likely to flee or more likely have health issues or be really important for the for industry or for commerce and so on and so forth. And then, of course, you have people who come into the age bracket, grow up into becoming 25 years old, which is now, it was reduced from 27 to 25. Klitschko's asking for it to be reduced lower than 25, but we've often talked about the issues there for doing so, because you've got a demographic black hole, but also the double whammy being that, and I don't quite know why it happened, but Ukraine suddenly made it possible for young Ukrainians, particularly men, to leave the country, right? You had this ban of leaving the country. Now they said actually young people can go and leave the country. You go and learn abroad and go on holiday and do this kind of stuff. But of course, that would, one assume, make it easier for Ukrainians to flee the country kind of permanently or semi-permanently. Klitschko here saying, you know, we're struggling to find soldiers as men are fleeing. It is really difficult for the Ukrainians, and the Russians, like I keep saying, just have the ability to attract all sorts of people from all around the world and throw them into this meat grinder and not worry too much when they die, because it's not going to impact Russian society. And in fact, they don't have to pay out as much as they would as if Russian soldiers fell. And the Ukrainians are just struggling from all sorts of different directions here. And you can't just replace infantrymen with drones. I mean, drones are really useful and they are doing an incredible job. And the Ukrainians have done a great job to substitute vast numbers of personnel with drones, but it can't be the complete answer. You need both infantrymen and really good drone coverage as well. Now, I showed you Oryx's loss list yesterday that was kind of 38 Ukrainian losses. Was it 9 Russian losses? Something like that. And it flipped, and it seems to be going backwards and forwards. And I talk about how a lot of times these depend on montages of videos come out, and it's difficult to draw massive conclusions from just looking at single days. You really need to look at, say, a whole month as they kind of these spikes smooth themselves out, and you get a sense of what's going on more completely. But some people do look at these and go, it's all terrible. Woofers here says, the Ukrainians have been getting slaughtered in the artillery attrition exchange rates in recent times. This recent reporting period, seeing 8 losses to 0 Russian losses. Things fluctuate a lot, but the trend isn't the best. But quite a few people came back to this, including Andrew Perpetua, who said, look, I don't think these SPGs, these self-propelled guns, are actually SPGs that are lost. So here we've got a 1 AS-90, you've got 2 Bogdana self-propelled guns, and you've got these Grodzika and Akatsias as well. He says, I think they are decoys of previously destroyed vehicles that just keep getting destroyed over and over again. So it looks like it might be cope, right, from Andrew Perpetua, but he's not one to actually hide behind cope. He was really critical when he needs to be, but then, you know, he is also looking at an awful lot of videos to suggest that actually there could be something funky going on here. So someone asked, what are the clues? And he says, look, Ukraine has pretty set ways of building emplacements for their real guns, and these are not remotely done that way. So the ones in the videos that are shown, because remember, Oryx and Andrew Perpetua, when they do their loss list, they link all of the pieces of footage so you can go and check them. And these are not remotely done that way and appear to be intentionally placed in a manner as to draw attention to itself. In other words, you know, the videos of these ones that have been blown up, these are not properly dug in. That's not what the Ukrainians do, and it looks like they've been placed to attract attention. He says also some of the guns have obvious signs of damage. It's possible that the drones we see are like the 6th drone or something. In other words, you know, they keep hitting the same thing, blowing up, and then you get, you know, video evidence from different angles, but also different wreckage of the gun, because actually that 6th drone makes the wreckage look different from that first drone. So you say, look, we've blown up another Bogdana here. Actually, it's the same Bogdana that's been hit 6 times. And every time you're saying, look, this is what we've done. Then that gets registered and added to the list. And then it takes people to really carefully go through and say, well, actually, this is a duplicate. This is the same SPG that's been hit 5 times already. This is just a 6th hit from a different angle, showing the wreckage in a different way. He said, but I kind of think they are collecting destroyed guns, repainting them and throwing them somewhere. So then Andrew's saying, well, actually, the Ukrainians here are taking some of these bits of wreckage and painting them up to look a bit more like they haven't been hit, and I whack them in the middle of the field and attracting them. It's like a honeypot, attracting the bees to it. Repainting them and throwing them somewhere. On some of them, the paint looks odd too. So yeah, that's just a theory, but I mean, if anyone's going to come up with a theory that's evidentially backed, it's going to be Andrew, who looks, you know, endlessly at these videos. Okay, Now, there's no new loss list that had to be mentioned. Now, throughout this war, we often get moments of, oh, look, this is what happened 2 years ago. And oh, look, right at the beginning of the war, this missile hit that, or this helicopter was doing this and it got shot down. And you're like, oh my goodness. And as time goes on, we get a fuller and fuller picture of what happened at the beginning of the war. Well, a Ukrainian missile strike in March 2022 apparently destroyed a Russian Il-76, that's one of these cargo planes, with all the personnel and equipment on the runway, and significantly damaged another aircraft in Taganrog, according to the 19th Separate Missile Brigade. So the strike was carried out with a Tochka U complex. These are these big old Soviet era missiles that Ukraine has used, and occasionally you see them use them again. I was seeing someone talk yesterday about Tochka U. They had a bunch of missile fuselages, if you like, but they didn't have the warhead, and they've used the Tochka U with some, I think, other ordnance warheads like big bombs and whatnot, and they put the big bomb on the front and then sent the Tochka, and it does its business as well. So, there have been these incidents where the Tochka U has been claimed to be the missile used, like right throughout the war, when you think they've completely run out of these, and then you're like, oh, that was a Tochka U, and you're like, oh, bloody hell, okay, interesting. But it could be Tochka U fuselage with a different warhead on the front. Right, Ukraine currently produces approximately 4 million drones per year, probably more than all the NATO countries combined, according to Bloomberg. By comparison, the US produces approximately 100,000 military drones annually. In 2022, there were only 10 drone manufacturers in Ukraine. Now there are 500 drone manufacturers in Ukraine. Absolutely incredible. Of course, that's going to include unmanned surface vehicles, unmanned ground vehicles, and of course, unmanned aerial vehicles. Don't just think they're all producing aerial vehicles. Russia's plan to conquer Ukraine unfolds in 3 stages, according to Foreign Affairs. The outlet says first that there will be battlefield dominance. Second, they will occupy or devastate enough land to cripple Ukraine's economy unless it complies with Moscow. And third, turn Ukraine into a satellite state like Belarus. 2026 will be decisive. So in this, they talk about taking, the Donbass, but then getting all of the that land corridor down to Odessa, which stops. This is the idea about crippling Ukraine's economy. That would just stop them being able to export. All that grain would have to go inland, and there would be in all sorts of economic trouble. And once that happens, then it falls apart, and you turn it into a Belarus. So that is the plan. Arguably, still for the Russians. I mean, we are wondering still what their realistic plans are for Ukraine. We have another montage of the destruction of new Russian reconnaissance drone, the Oleg, by the Signum Battalion, along with several other drones in the montage. The Veshchi Oleg has a 10 times zoom camera, a flight altitude of up to 3,000 meters, and it can fly up to 160 kilometers as a range there. So you are still getting the Russians, as you are with the Ukrainians, of course, innovating and coming out with new designs and new pieces of kit, and the Ukrainians having to deal with them. So that's another montage. There you go, and the X-wing of a Lancet there. Okay, and then finally, for this section, Russia's human safari continues. A double tap war crime caught on drone video. First, the drone hits a Kherson gas station. When firefighters arrive, the second drone hits them. Now, this is from the 6th of July, 2025. The reason why this is coming up again is because the UN has just documented 247 such attacks, deliberate strikes on civilians and first responders across a 300-plus kilometer area. Investigators traced the chain of command from drone operators sharing footage on Telegram through military leadership directly to Putin himself. In an exclusive interview, UN Commission Chair Eric Moes told Euromaidan Press how investigators traced these crimes directed by Russian authorities to inflict maximum harm. And remember, this is the same time that in the UN, the US is trying to water down the claims, the statement in the resolution about the Ukraine war, wanting to take out any claim that Russia is committing aggression. My goodness, what, they're not committing aggression? So the UN comes out with a report to show like how despicable the Russians are behaving and how it goes up to Putin. And meanwhile, the Americans are saying, well, we don't want them to be labeled as aggression, and we also want to take out any reference to territorial integrity for the Ukrainians. Absolutely shocking, as I reported yesterday. Right, moving on to distant strikes. So there were 121 drones sent into Ukraine last night, and 90 of which were intercepted, which leaves 31 to hit 19 different places. That's a 74% interception rate, which is still not as good as it needs to be. Not at all. Of course, it needs to be 100%. Now, in here we have another montage of Shaheds getting intercepted. I think Zelensky shared this interception of a bunch of Shahed drones by interceptor drones. This is showing the prevalence and success of interceptor drones from concept to reality. These are now being, they're providing a very important part of the Ukrainian ability to intercept Shahed drones. You're going to have machine guns from mobile fire teams and the Gepards, and then the Skynets. You kind of move up in quality from sort of Browning and Maxim machine guns up to Skynets, and then you get missiles from AMRAAMs to AIM-9Xs from the NASAMs to Patriots. But of course, in that you've also got things like the Hawk air defense system, the books using Sea Sparrows and all sorts of different missile capabilities, and of course MANPADs, portable air defense systems on your shoulder, and you can fire both the machine guns and the MANPADs from helicopters. You got helicopters shooting them down with their own sort of machine guns, and then you got interceptor drones. You got planes like the Yak planes as well, Yak 52s, as well as F-16s and Mirages going into it. So you got the whole gamut of how to take these down and what you really want, and then the electronic warfare, of course, to spoof them or bring them down. But of course, what you really want is the cheapest, most effective way to bring them down to prevail. Now, talking about Yak 52s, a volunteer organization from the Netherlands called Protect Ukraine has bought a Yak 52 training aircraft from Britain, from the UK, for 78,000 euros. They did that in October, and they've handed it over to Ukrainian Defense Forces. The aircraft has already been used to patrol the airspace of the Odessa region and to intercept drones. So the other week I was saying the Czech, very amazingly, the Czech people raised enough money for a Flamingo, which was sort of 500,000 euros in it, and then they did it so quickly that Firepoint said, "Look, we'll throw another one in there." And some people thought quite controversially, said, "I wouldn't have spent that on a single missile. I would have spent that just from the psychology of raising money on, say, a helicopter, like a Me-8, whatever from somewhere else, and got that to Ukraine, and that could be used over and over again to shoot down Shahed drones." Well, here, 78,000 euros gets a plane that's already being used to patrol the airspace around Odessa. I mean, 78,000, you could, for the same amount of money. And I know, they need all of this, but, 500,000 euros, and you've got a whole bunch of these planes. So obviously you need the pilots, but you'll be scrabbling around getting every retired pilot you can, get some mercenary pilots from abroad. Hey, you're not going flying into the war zone here. You are flying above Odessa, and you're just shooting down these Shaheds, particularly the ones over the Black Sea that get together and mass at one point and then all attack all at once. Well, you need a load of Yaks up there, maybe firing at those. I know they're probably better at shooting down reconnaissance drones, but this is I think that's a really effective bit of fundraising there to get a whole plane and get it to Ukraine. So brilliant. But maybe it's not either or, it's both and. So now we're going to strikes on Ukraine This morning, there were strikes on Kharkiv. 3 injuries were initially reported as the city center received some Russian drones. Man aged 68 and 60-year-old woman being hospitalized. 77-year-old was treated locally. 2 of the 3 hits were caught on video that you can see. Mayor of Kharkiv, Ihor Terekov, has said several dozen houses and a civilian transport enterprise were damaged. And more detail on that in a second. One business owner sifts through the debris of his children's store, picking up books, one being Charlie in a chocolate factory. This is just, it's just horrendous, isn't it? Bastards. A 47-year-old man has died in a drone attack in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast during the night. Many different attacks in the region there. The victim was hit near Sinelnikove, which has been routinely hammered, where houses and infrastructure facilities were damaged. I don't know. There must be something there for the Russians, to keep on attacking that village. Elsewhere in Dnipropetrovsk, the energy sector was attacked again, while private houses were damaged from Nikopol in the south to Pavlohrad. The prosecutor's office showed these photos of the consequences of the night attack on Pavlohrad. So consistent attacks on Ukraine. Ukraine's general. Oh no, we're going to come to that later. I need to refresh this. There is a bit more to add to this because there's now video footage coming out and imagery of what's taking place in Kharkiv. So reporting restrictions have been lifted in Kharkiv, and it can now be said that a transport and delivery business was hit near the city center this morning. The SAT company's warehouses were partially destroyed. Again, every attack like this, I mean, think of the millions of dollars of damage to these kind of places, routinely taken out. If you're losing one of these a week, one of these every 4 nights, eventually you've got no economy left. So this really hurts. Another 2 people are now being admitted to hospital after this morning's attack, which makes 5. This was hit by 3 drones. Just a lot of destruction being done consistently to Ukraine's commercial and industrial sectors. Okay, so Sean Pinner saying something about the challenge of getting young men into the armed forces. Sean Pinner says, I've been saying this since my exchange. The problem might never have existed if everyone from 18 up had been mobilized from the start. You wouldn't be sending 80-year-olds straight into combat. By now, those in officer training would be 21 to 22. Specialists would have had years of experience, and deserters fewer if basic military training had been universal from day one. If you don't fight for Ukraine, you'll end up fighting for Russia, forcibly conscripted, dying for Moscow, imperial elite if Putin succeeds. That's for sure. So Sean Pinner, he's very much on the side of lowered, just full-on national mobilization right from the start. And there, like I've said to you before, there are arguments both ways on that. It's just so freaking difficult. Either way, you're screwed. But actually, it's looking more and more challenging for Ukraine to get boots on the ground. DTEC has showed footage of strikes. So this is the independent, the private energy company in Ukraine that owns loads of power facilities. And I think this was an answer to why are we running out of power? Why are we having power shortages? Say, people living in, I don't know, Lviv, Kiev, wherever, Ukrainians. And DTEC have brought out this, say, well, this is why. And it's just a montage of the destruction of power facilities and possibly even the death of the people in that montage video as well. It's just a really effective video that shows just how wide scale the attacks have been on Ukraine's energy infrastructure. Just yeah. So I'm going to go to a little bit of analysis. Sometimes I think I need to do a chart on, one column it's like all the challenges that Ukraine have right now, and on the other column and the success of the Russian, on the other column all the challenges that Russia faces and the successes for Ukraine. So for Ukraine at the moment, it's boots on the ground, it is guided glide bombs, it's the energy infrastructure, it is the creeping forward of the Russians, because as they are able to get people from all over the world and continually throw people into this meat grinder. It's absolutely disastrous in terms of the human cost of this war for Russia, but they don't give a damn, right? So it's a really challenging moment for Ukraine. It's really critical that they're looking like they're going to lose Pokrovsk. They could have encircled troops around Myrnohrad. Zaporizhzhia is looking like a bit of a disaster with Huliaipole under the Kosh. Of course, you can zoom out and say, actually, it's not huge. It's just like single percent of Ukrainian territory over a year or something like that. But you're going to struggle to get this land back when this war ends. So rather you don't lose it in the first place, rather than lose it and then have to trade something to get that land back. But then, not losing it in the first place requires huge numbers of troops. And what the Ukrainians are trying to do is replace those troops, as I mentioned, with drones and have these drone corridors. But, they are quite brittle. Like once you burst through those drone corridors, then you're through. You need defenders. You need boots on the ground. And that's what Ukraine just doesn't have enough of. So, I think Europe and NATO need to be stepping up big time at the moment and helping in really material ways. For the Russians, of course, the question is, well, how long can they keep throwing humans in? Are they scraping the barrel now? I mean, we've been thinking that could be the case for a couple of years, but they still 2 years later, and they are still generating enough people to throw into these war zones. Now, I actually think they probably are sending in far fewer people than they used to, but the Ukrainians have fewer. So it's like, as the Ukrainians come down in the number of people, the Russians don't need to have as many people to throw in. So they're both, like I keep saying this, and I believe this now as much as ever, is that this is a game of attritional chicken, where it's like a pressure cooker, where there are all these pressures on both sides, and whose cooker is going to blow the lid first. As attrition builds up the pressure in terms of material and personnel, and then you've got energy attacks on the energy infrastructure. Well, Ukraine have been hammering Russia's hydrocarbon sector, and that's their ability to make money, and that pressure is definitely mounting with the Russians. And then you got the Americans finally coming in, Trump finally coming in with decent sanctions on Rosneft and Lukoil, that's adding to that pressure. And meanwhile, they've got their own losses on the front lines and losses of material, and that's the pressure building for the Russians. But at the moment, the Russians, I think, have had a really good 3 months of hammering, good from their point of view, of course, hammering Ukraine's energy infrastructure, like their ability to make energy for their industry, for their commerce, and for their people, for their civilians. And that affects the psychology, the psyche of the country. That energy infrastructure has been absolutely hammered, much more so than the Russian energy infrastructure, although recently Ukraine has been getting onto hitting substations and taking out not just the hydrocarbons, but actually the energy production, the energy distribution, because there's no point producing energy if you can't distribute it. So it might be easier to hit substations than actually take out big old buildings of power stations. So they're going for the easy pickings of the substations, but that's going to build the pressure up for Russia. But it's a much bigger country, and it can maybe sustain those attacks to a greater degree, and it might have more resilience in terms of the population and more pliant. So you've got these two pressure cookers going off. Like, whose lid's going to blow first? And I think you've got a period at the moment that's particularly challenging for the Ukrainians in terms of all the aforementioned, and I just hope that they can build enough, that have drawn enough resilience. But I think they're going to need the help of Europe and the US much more tangibly. And that's not to say that Europe isn't helping an awful lot. There's an awful lot of money going into Ukraine. Really, really is. But I think there needs to be material assistance now. I really think we need to have a closing of the skies, certainly in Western Ukraine, and we need European air defenses and planes flying over Ukraine. It's just, we need that to happen. They've got the North Koreans, and no one's batting an eyelid. Euromaidan press says of Ukraine's successes last night. So Ukraine had a fairly decent night last night. Drone struck petrochemical plant in Stavrolen in southern Russia, causing a fire. The facility was previously targeted in late October, and we have quite a bit of footage coming out from there. Here we can see a red glow in the distance. Russian region of Stavropol. It's unconfirmed, but reported that Ukrainian drones have returned to hit the Stavrolen chemical plant in Budyanovsk. It was attacked, as mentioned, 2 weeks ago. There's another image here, and the general staff then confirmed this today. Ukrainian Special Operations Forces struck Russia's strategic Stavrolen petrochemical plant in Budyanovsk using long-range drones. Several drones hit their mark, and video that was caught on video here, as you can see from that. This one that came out earlier in the evening. Then yesterday, well, not then, prior to that, yesterday, I was reporting on this in my hits and losses as there were drones that looked like it was either Lyuty or more probably an FP1 drone that was flying into Orsk. The Orsk Nefteogintsens, something like that, refinery is burning, specifically its AVT, atmospheric vacuum distillation unit. The core facility processes crude oil into primary fuels. That was hit during the morning yesterday, and caught on video there. There's at least one fire burning away. Close up of the Orsk refinery, Exile Nova says the AVT is burning. AVT is a combination of AT and VT units. AT for the primary processing crude oil at the refinery. VT is a vacuum tube unit processing fuel oil entering the AT unit. So that happened yesterday. Hopefully that can be, well, it could be hit again, and that the damage there is pretty critical. Analysis confirms that Ukraine's strike on the Orsk refinery hit those units. It was a key up. The Viz braking unit was a key upgrade built between 2014 and 15 at the cost of 5.5 billion rubles. The unit boosts fuel output, reduces heavy waste, then feeds the hydro treating chain that produces high-grade diesel and gasoline, and that may be struggling to operate. Then we had claims originally last night. The claim was that Ukraine had picked off another power plant in the occupied Donetsk region. I always wonder about this because kind of you've got Ukrainians there living under occupation, and there must be a bit of a feeling of like, should we be doing this, stopping our own Ukrainians getting energy? But nonetheless, the Starobeshchevskaya coal-fired power plant is about 30 kilometers southeast of Donetsk city in Novyi Svit. It's one of the major power sources for all of the Russian-controlled part of the region. So that was the original claim. The attack on Starobeshchevska thermal power plant in Donetsk region is ongoing. The installed capacity is 2,300 megawatts. That's Max 25 talking about that. And then Ukraine's general staff then said this morning they did not hit a power plant, as was first reported by locals in occupied Donetsk last night. Instead, they targeted an ammunition depot in the village of Novyi Svit, where the Starobeshchevskaya coal-fired power plant is also situated. But on the other hand, says Tim White, Ukraine's special operations team confirms a hit on a Stavrolen plant. Sorry, so there wasn't. No, so I got that. I'm confused there. So now it seems that it was an ammunition depot, not the power plant, and that would make more sense as somewhere to hit in occupied territory. But they have confirmed hitting Stavrolen petrochemical plant in Budyanovsk. So good news there. Right. Remember yesterday as well, Saratov was hit, as in 2 nights ago, and I was reporting on that yesterday. This is an image that I didn't have access to yesterday, but that seems to indicate some fairly widespread damage may have been done to Saratov, but I guess we'll find out at some point. Now this video has come out. This is of Feodosia in Crimea, where you have these FP2 drones hitting the oil depot there. Now, I showed you a video yesterday where they didn't hit these big old tanks, but actually one building was hit by one of these drones. I don't know if this is the same place. You've got 2 drones in this montage here. The first one hits one of these big old tanks there, but there's no sign of any other fire or explosions, and that seems to definitely hit the side. But then as we're going over, maybe this is a completely different part of the depot and we can't see, the footage is quite pixelated, but there doesn't seem to be any fire from a previous hit. So both of these can't be the first hits. So I don't know. Maybe this first drone hit and there was fire, but the second drone hit somewhere else where you couldn't, it wasn't in the frame. But anyway, 2 drones potentially hit Feodosia, that oil depot yesterday. And then this morning we have news of Salavat being hit, but I have no idea what has been hit there. There's just a report of explosions in Salavat. And I'll just see if there's anything else that's been added. We've got a Russian drone hitting people's houses. That's all on the. Here we go, Stavrolen. So more on Stavrolen. The image most likely shows the aftermath of hit of 2 key units: the ethylene and propylene compression and rectification unit is a key component of polyethylene production. The pyrolysis unit, ethylene production, is a key component of the plant. These units produce ethylene, which is then used to synthesize polyethylene and other polymers. The plant has suspended production, so it definitely looks like that has been hit fairly significantly. So good news there for the Ukrainians. And yeah, I don't know that there's anything else particularly. Wow. So against the backdrop of the war in Ukraine, Embraer has announced an expansion of the capabilities of the A-29 Super Tucano light attack aircraft. This is a propeller aircraft to combat drones. The aircraft is reinforced with laser-guided missiles and 12.7mm machine guns. This is a plane that loads of people on previous threads have said, I don't know why they don't get planes like this to help shoot down drones. Actually, military prop planes rather than like the Yak-52s. Given the company's workload and other orders, the prospect of receiving light attack aircraft in Ukraine does not look very realistic today. But, that's something that 3 years ago would have been a good thing to get up and running. Yeah, just talk about the places that have already been hit, like Stavrolen. Yeah, okay. So moving on to other bits and pieces, we're going to start with the Russian central bank dumping 3 trillion rubles into the economy, according to the analyst. He says that Russia's created 3 trillion rubles and dumped it into the market today, effectively making inflation worse and bailing the banks out of yet another hole as they struggle to meet customer withdrawal demands. Personal accounts have gone from holding 77% of personal accounts money to just 14% in the past few months as public trust evaporates and they withdraw their cash and savings. The banks are hovering on a precipice of a huge financial crisis, and so it looks like they poured 3 trillion rubles into the economy. Well, we'll see what effect that has. Romania has moved to take control of Lukoil assets ahead of US sanctions deadline on November the 21st. It aims to take control over the local subsidiary of Russia's Lukoil in order to comply with the upcoming sanctions, according to the Romanian energy minister. So that's what they're doing. But in Bulgaria, they say that it's about 1 month of gasoline and 50 days of diesel left as the US sanctions on Russia's Lukoil take effect on the aforementioned November the 21st. So Reuters report that Lukoil operates Bulgaria's Burgas refinery and much of its fuel network. Officials are seeking US approval for the refinery to keep running. There were, talks about this refinery and all sorts of Lukoil entities, were possibly going to be taken over by Gunvor, and then that has not happened. They've withdrawn their bid as they were slagged off by the Americans for being puppets of the Putin regime. So there are loads of implications and loads of considerations for nations that do still rely on Lukoil and Rosneft in their own hydrocarbons industry and sector. Brazil has begun refusing Russian diesel fuel following Trump's sanctions, according to the Financial Times. That's really good. That's a BRICS country. China's Yangchang Petroleum, one of the country's largest refineries, has reportedly dropped Russian crude oil from its latest tender, covering December to mid-February, according to Reuters. The plant has previously purchased Russian oil regularly, typically 1 cargo per month, but none for the latest month. And then 5 big Indian refiners, says Bloomberg, haven't placed any orders for Russian oil for next month. India has scaled back purchases of Russian crude for arrival in December, showing that Western sanctions and trade talks with the US are having a major impact on buying patterns. So this is all good news for Ukraine, as Russia is going to suffer more and more with its budget. Now, is there any surprise then that we now hear that reports are stating Putin will visit India on December the 5th? The goal of his visit is clear: negotiations regarding oil and a bypassing of US sanctions. So there is panic, I think, in the Kremlin as they scrabble to try and deal with a number of nations that were otherwise supportive of Russia as they stop buying Russian oil and gas. Steve Rosenberg, BBC correspondent in Moscow, says in today's Russian newspapers, there are these different topics discussed. Russia's budget deficit gets bigger. Anton Gerashenko has a good thread on Russia's really troubling budget. Plans for a new tax on gadgets, putting up taxes, classic way of dealing with the problem. A cooling off period for SIM cards, don't know about that. And the dangers of rehabilitating Joseph Stalin. So the idea that some of these historical problematic characters or people being, you know, having their there's a renaissance, isn't there? Almost like a resurrection of how great these people were, when really they weren't. Joseph Stalin was a genocidal dictator, but he's getting a bit of props these days from the Russian people. But evidently a Russian newspaper there saying, hey, hang on, there could be some dangers in rehabilitating Joseph Stalin. Right, there's all sorts of controversy around the Energoatom, the Ukrainian nuclear energy provider, around their contracts and kickbacks for people associated with them. There's this scandal that's rumbling on. In Kiev, a court is deciding a pre-trial measure for Dmitry Bazov, a key figure in a Mindich tapes case. Bazov, ex-security director of Energoatom and a former prosecutor, is accused by NABU of co-leading the scheme under the alias Tenor. SAP seeks his arrest with bail set at 45.4 million hryvnias. There's all sorts going on still with that case, as you can imagine. An Essex man has been sentenced to 7 years in prison after attempting to offer himself as a spy to the Russian intelligence service following an investigation by counterterrorism policing in London. My goodness, I wonder what sort of person he is, whether this is ideological, whether it's financially desperate, you know, what is underwriting his desire to help out Russia. In Kherson, Zelensky held. So Zelensky went to Kherson yesterday. I don't know if we. Oh, I did have a video of him. Oh, here it is. This is him in Kherson. Greg and myself have done a video standing under that. So he visited Kherson yesterday, just shortly after Angelina Jolie, actually. In Kherson, Zelensky held a security meeting focused on drone defense and regional support. Discussions included boosting electronic warfare and mobile fire units, expanding the REBER systems, and securing roads and logistics. Energy infrastructure, municipal funding, and educational support were also key topics. So Kherson is under such a lot of pressure, relentless drone attacks. He met with military and security leaders focusing on countering relentless drone attacks. Ukraine's unmanned systems forces have been tasked with strengthening the city's defenses. Of course, their needs are everywhere around Ukraine. But there's a nice incident here of Zelensky meeting with kids in a shelter in Kherson, and it's really good to see stuff like this. As he does a bit of PR, I think it's really important. You have Putin rarely leaves the Kremlin, really. Occasionally goes to places like Occupy Crimea, and then you're left thinking, well, which Putin is that? Is the Putin that likes to hug and kiss people? Well, that's not the Putin that likes to sit at the other end of a very long table from people. Anyway, so we have really good to see Zelensky out and about there and doing what he needs to do. Anyway, that's enough from me. I really appreciate your support. Thank you so much for it. And keep your eyes peeled for further videos today. And we'll try and get the fundraiser up and running shortly as well. But in the meantime, if you haven't already, please like, subscribe, and share. Throw in a good like and subscribe if you haven't already done so. Take care. I'll speak to you soon.